So what does Putin believe this? Well, in the late 80s, the Soviet Union had basically lost the Cold War. And they lost the Cold War because their elite basically gave up. They no longer believed in communism. They didn't believe in self-sacrifice for the nation. They thought that Western values, the Western lifestyle was much better. Okay, so they gave up. In the late 80s, there was an American historian. He actually works for the American State Department. But his name is Francis Fukuyama. And he wrote an extremely influential essay called The End of History. End of history, okay? With a quotation mark. And he argued that the Soviet Union fell and America became triumphant because liberal democracy is the best idea to have ever been invented. And to make his argument, he uses the philosopher Friedrich Hegel, okay? Now, Friedrich Hegel had something called the theory of the dialectic. And what Hegel argued is that history is determined by a war of ideas. The progress of history is determined by the movement of ideas. And how ideas work is that they have a pattern called the dialectic, okay? So there's a thesis, a new idea comes into being. But then we recognize that this idea has problems. It's too extreme. It's too problematic. So we create an antithesis, okay? But this antithesis itself is also too extreme. And this creates also problems. So then what happens is the thesis and the antithesis come together and create a more moderate, more efficient idea, okay, called the synthesis. And this is how history moves or progresses. And so Fukuyama takes this idea and says, okay, well, this explains what's happening today, where at first you have a thesis called capitalism, okay? Capitalism. And this created the Industrial Revolution, right? And because capitalism was too extreme, we moved towards communism, okay? Communism was created to counteract the extremes of capitalism. But communism itself is too extreme, so then we move towards the middle, which is the right idea, which is called liberal democracy. Okay? So what is liberal democracy? Well, at the core of liberal democracy is the idea of consumerism. And the idea of consumerism is that we exist to buy things. And as long as we buy things, there'll be world peace. Why? Because consumers have a need to buy, and therefore nations have a need to produce. And nations produce the best when they're trading together as opposed to warring against each other. Okay? So this is the argument that Francis Fukuyama makes in The End of History. I want to explain this argument further, okay? What's he really saying? Okay, so throughout human history, all societies have struggled with one problem, which is how do we optimize the workforce? How do we get each and every person to work as hard as possible for our society? And if everyone did that, then our society would be strong, united, and prosperous, right? Okay? So that's a fundamental problem of politics. How do you optimize workforce participation, okay? And traditionally, or historically, there have been three answers. The first is war. The second is religion. And the third is civilization, okay? Now, as you can understand, these three things work because they give structure, meaning and purpose to our lives, okay? And we have structure, meaning, and purpose, we are much more motivated to work hard. But as you can also see, there are actually lots of problems with all three, right? War is you kill people, that's bad. Religion is superstitious, okay? But civilization itself is also problematic because the logical extreme of civilization is racism, okay? Which is to say that we Russians are better than everyone else, we Chinese are better than everyone else, therefore we can do whatever we want, okay? And this naturally leads to imperialism, right? We have a duty to go conquer other people, to civilize them, right? Something called the white man's burden. And this leads to fascism, okay? Okay? War and conquest are the ultimate good. So historically, war, religion, and civilization have given people structure, meaning, and purpose, but they create a lot of problems. They create suffering and war and pain, okay? So, but over time, what has happened is that all of them, over time, have become much more abstract. And the reason why they've become more abstract is in order to increase the population, in order to create mass society. Okay? So let me give you an example of this. The earliest religions in humanity have been polytheistic. Okay? And the gods themselves were very much like humans. So think of the Greeks, okay? Zeus, Athena, Hera. Okay, it was a polytheistic society, and they were very much like humans. But over time, this polytheism became monotheistic, and it became abstract, okay? The idea of God was so much removed from us. And the benefit of that is that you can have more people believing in one God. And it motivates you to work harder, okay? Because it's just an abstract concept. And because of abstraction, we develop new ideas. For example, money, okay? So rather than have war, religion, and civilization as the structure and center of our society, why not make money the structure of your society, okay? And this is what we call capitalism. And capitalism, of course, led to the Industrial Revolution, industrialism. Okay? Capitalism meant that societies were becoming wealthier and wealthier, more industrial and more industrialized. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. But there's a problem with capitalism, right? What's the problem with making capital or money at the very heart of your society? Exactly, okay. So the first major problem with capitalism is it's all-consuming. So as Jack says, all capitalism cares about is the expansion and growth of capital, regardless of its effect on society, okay? Profit for the sake of growing profit. It's an all-consuming idea, which can ultimately lead to the destruction of the planet, okay? That's the first problem. What's another problem with capitalism, or the idea of having money as the heart and center of your society? Anyone? Okay. So what this means is that money likes to consolidate itself. Okay, consolidating. Okay, meaning that so the example is, let's just say that each of us had $1 million, right? What's the fastest way for us to grow our money? If we put it together, right? And then we can go invest it. Okay? So in other words, if you just let capitalism do whatever it wants to infinity, what happens is that you exactly have one person with all the money. Okay? Does that make sense? Because that's the fastest way to grow money, by consolidating it. Okay, so that's problematic. What else is wrong with capitalism or money? Okay, so another problem is the idea of alienating or dehumanizing. Okay? What does this mean? Capital alienates and dehumanizes. What does that mean? Exactly, okay. You as a person cease to be human, right? To be a human is to be a complex, multifaceted individual who likes to create and love. But in capitalism, you're only your production value, you're only the amount of money in your bank account, okay? Does that make sense? All right? So, for all these reasons, capitalism is really bad. There are actually more reasons, okay? So Karl Marx, in his Communist Manifesto, points out all these problems of capitalism, and he proposes a solution, which is, okay, rather than make money at the heart and center of your industrial society, make the worker the heart and center of your society, okay? So he makes this argument. But what's very revolutionary or prescient about his argument is this is a natural cycle, okay? This is part of the Hegel cycle where capitalism comes along and communism will be the natural evolution of capitalism, okay? Why? Okay, so let's do the thought experiment, okay? Let's do this thought experiment where your parents have died and now you're working in a factory in order to survive. How do you feel about this? Your parents have died, there's no one to support you, so at age 16, 17, 18, you have to go off to a factory to make money for yourself. So how do you feel about this? Are you happy about this? How do you feel?
It's pretty depressing.
Depressing and lonely and
probably makes the person bitter.
yeah, exactly. Okay, you're bitter and you're depressed. Okay, you're alienated. So then, what do you do? Then what do you do? What can you do now? You're bitter, you're angry, you're depressed, you're lonely. So what do you do? Okay, you start to think about why this is the case, right? You start to have a political consciousness, okay? What Marx calls political consciousness. From this alienation of the worker, workers will start to develop a political consciousness, right? They're like, why is this happening? Why is the government abandoning me? Why has society abandoned me? What can I do about this, okay? So then what happens? That's exactly right. You want change, right? And how do you enact change?
You try to spread your ideas.
Yes, okay. You spread your ideas and you organize, right? And when you organize, what do you realize?
You're stronger together than apart.
Yeah, what you recognize when you start to organize is the capitalists need you to do the work, right? The capitalists own the capital and the factories, but you're the one who's actually doing the real work. So without you, the factories can't run. So as long as you're united, you can enact whatever political demands you want. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so for Marx, this is just a natural evolution of capitalism. Capitalism leads to the alienation of the working class, which will lead to their political consciousness, which will lead to their solidarity, which will lead to a political revolution. And so you can make the worker as the heart and center of your society.